Hello, welcome to the International Tax Information Session presented by the University of Tennessee Knoxville International Student and Scholar Services Office and also the UT Payroll Office for the UT system. We're glad that you're here. This is a tax information session prepared for students that are filing income tax. It's general information. My name is Brian Todd. I work in the International Student and Scholar Services Office. And I'm going to take a moment to introduce my colleagues. First of all, Valentina is behind the scenes. Valentina Gomez is our graduate assistant in ISSS, but let's move to the next slide and we can introduce our presenters today. First of all, Alyssa Adirati is here. So Alyssa, I'll let you introduce yourself and then Elizabeth after that.
Sure. My name is Alyssa Adirati. I am the Assistant Director for UT Systems Payroll, Benefits, and Retirement Office. You may know me as the lead admin for Glacier. So you probably see a lot of my emails, and I'm happy to be with you guys today to ask or to answer some general questions.
It's Elizabeth Clevenger. I am the Senior International Scholar Coordinator in the ISSS office. I've been working with international student tax questions and with Glacier for about 10 years in different contexts. I'm really happy to be with you today.
Yeah, and my name is Brian Todd. I'm a Senior Student Coordinator in ISSS. So let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. What type of taxes are there? There's a number of different taxes that you may be paying as an international student. This presentation is focused on income tax, but I wanted to make sure that we mention that there are other types of taxes. So Social Security tax is one that you may pay. You see a picture of a store there. You may pay taxes every time you make a purchase at the store called sales tax. So if we can go to the next slide, you'll see that there is a receipt. This is a receipt from a recent trip to Walmart. And you can see that every time you purchase something at a store like Walmart, you'll be paying some tax. So this was about $1.83 on a purchase made. And so some of that money goes to the state government, some of the local government. But we are going to be talking primarily about income tax today, which is a tax paid to the U.S. federal government. So next slide, please. All right, what brought you here? Why are you watching this presentation? We're going to go through some of these, so we'll just kind of click through the different questions. So this might be your first time doing taxes in the U.S., or perhaps you're here but you weren't employed in the year 2023. I didn't mention earlier, but we're recording this on March 20th, 2024. So we're currently providing information related to the tax year 2023. Do you have a graduate assistant position at UT? Have you worked at UT and also at another place during the past year? Do you have scholarship income that is not employment? It's possible that you were employed outside UT, perhaps through CPT or OPT. Are you a visiting scholar? You're not actually a student. Maybe you're on F1 OPT or your I-20s from another school, or you're a J1 scholar or H1B, or maybe you have no idea why you're here. And if that's you, thanks for joining us. Maybe you'll figure it out as we're going through the presentation. Let's move on to the next slide. Can you relate to any of the following statements? Maybe you say, I have no idea what to do about taxes. Maybe taxes make you anxious. Maybe you want to follow tax laws carefully, and I hope you do. You're very interested in being in compliance. That's very important. You don't want any problems with immigration, and you want to definitely make sure that you don't pay too much on your taxes. We can all relate to that. So let's move on to the next slide. We need to talk about this question. What could go wrong? I mean, what if you don't comply with tax laws, just like with immigration regulations, tax laws are extremely important. And I think we couldn't emphasize this too much. A lack of compliance could lead to consequences that would impact your immigration status, future opportunities, meaning, applying to other statuses like H-1B or if you ever wanted to apply for permanent residence in the United States. So you definitely don't want to have a problem related to taxes that makes you ineligible for those future opportunities. And then finally, visa renewal eligibility could potentially be impacted. So that's why it's so important to be in compliance. Let's go to the next slide. And we also need to mention some common errors that may occur. For example, students, we sometimes hear stories about students not filing any tax forms at all. That's an error we want to avoid, or they miss the tax deadline. So I've had students come into my office in the summer in July and say, I didn't do any taxes. Is that bad? Filing the wrong tax forms. You might file as a resident when you're actually a non-resident, and we'll talk about what that means later. Next slide, please. All right, some important disclaimers. First of all, we are not tax advisors. We are not licensed. We are not, we don't have any, official designation to advise anyone on their specific tax forms. So we can't give you specific advice about how to file your forms. What we're doing today is talking about general tax information. So that's very important to note. Let's go to the next slide. We cannot legally provide tax advice about your specific situation. Next slide. So what are we going to cover? We told you what we cannot do for you, but what are we going to cover? So basic tax info, tax terminology. We'll talk about some of the different tax forms, tax treaties, dates and deadlines, different tax filing options and the process. We're going to talk about Glacier Tax Prep, which is a software that the University of Tennessee provides to employees of the University of Tennessee that are non-tax residents or non-residents for tax purposes. What could you do if you don't have Glacier? And then we'll talk about frequently asked questions and provide some resources that you would be able to use to help you file your taxes. So next slide. We're also going to cover a glossary of terms to start off. So we'll talk about these one at a time. So let's go on to the next slide. Non-resident alien. So what do we mean? Alien means any individual who is not a U.S. citizen or U.S. national. We're not talking about science fiction movies. We're talking about for tax purposes. So a non-resident alien for tax purposes has not passed the green card test or the substantial presence test. So I have a photo here of international students at UT at orientation. So they're most likely going to be non-residents for tax purposes. Next slide. A resident alien for tax purposes is a non-U.S. citizen or U.S. national who has passed either the green card test or substantial presence test. So here we have some students who are graduating. So probably by the time of graduation, there are people who will no longer be a non-resident for tax purposes, but will be a resident. It is possible to be a resident for tax purposes, even though for immigration purposes, you're a non-resident. Next slide. All right, it's important to note that non-residents and residents for tax purposes pay taxes differently. They use different forms, they have different rules, they might use different software, and in many cases, they will pay different amounts when it comes to how much tax they actually pay. Next slide. So, this is a tax return. It's a tax return is a form filed with the tax authority that reports income and other relevant financial information and personal circumstances. So they are used to calculate tax liability, schedule tax payments, or request refunds. This is the 1040 NR, which is most often filed by tax non-residents. Next slide. Tax filing. You can do this. Filing means you're submitting or sending your tax form to the U.S. IRS tax agency. And on that, you say how much money you made during the year and how much you've already paid in taxes. You can either file it online or by mail. Non-residents will generally be filing by mail. Next slide. The tax season, so these are important dates and deadlines that we mentioned before. The tax season runs from January to April. So right now we're in the year 2024. So we are doing the tax forms for the year 2023, and the tax season began January 29th and it ends on April 15th. April 15th is the federal tax deadline. Income tax, a type of tax that is levied on individual wages and salaries and other types of income. We already mentioned this earlier. Income tax is paid throughout the calendar year. So if you were employed, if you received income, you would have been taxed throughout 2023 through tax withholding. And Alyssa can mention more about that later. But that money has been going out each month. And now that you're filing your forms, you'll be calculating whether you paid the right amount or if you need to pay more or get some money back. Next slide. FICA. I want to mention this because this is a U.S. federal payroll tax paid by tax residents. And FICA is something that if you're a tax resident should be coming out of your paycheck, but if you're a non-resident should not be. So that's something to be aware of, and it's something that a tax resident could say to a non-resident, how come I'm paying more? So let's go to the next slide. Tax credits and deductions. Tax credit, this is something that you would come across as you're actually filing tax forms. A tax credit is an amount you subtract from the tax you owe. It can lower your tax payment or increase your refund. A tax deduction reduces how much of your income is subject to taxes. So the important thing on these is that there are less options for tax non-residents to claim credits or deductions. And these things can be very complicated. So you need to use the proper tax software to determine if you're eligible. It's always, we say, remember that tax residents and non-residents are taxed differently. So you may hear about someone who is a tax resident who has a different situation when it comes to tax credits and deductions. Next slide. All right, tax year. I don't know why there's a question mark right there, but we already mentioned earlier that we are currently filing tax forms for tax year 2023. Next slide. All right, I'm actually going to turn it over to Alyssa at this point because I've reached the end of my knowledge on many of these topics. So Alyssa, would you talk to us about tax treaties?
Sure. Okay, so for tax treaties, probably what I want to mention is that you see on the screen here, it's a special agreement between the U.S. and another country that they've come to terms with, and there's rules and regulations about who's eligible and those for a tax exemption, for federal tax exemption on your paychecks or on your student scholarship. These are completely determined by Glacier. So if you have a Glacier account, you've gone through and you've answered questions that Glacier then calculates your eligibilities and your tax exemptions. So that's how you would know if you are eligible for a tax treaty. Should you claim a tax treaty, I would not be able to advise you whether you should claim it or not. Everyone's situation is different. So I cannot advise you on that. How do I claim a tax treaty? Glacier is how we determine those eligibilities, and we cannot accept tax treaties other than through Glacier. And how does it affect my paycheck? So every tax treaty is different. I'll talk about Bangladesh's tax treaty. I know it's $8,000 for a student a year, every calendar year. So that means there's an $8,000 tax exemption. Once you've met that $8,000, then you start paying taxes. So for a tax year, say you made $13,000 a year. So you would have $8,000 tax exempt and then the remaining. So those are, we'll talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about how those are reported on your taxes here in a few slides, I believe. So we can maybe come back to that, but they are reported differently. So we'll talk about a 1042S form, and we'll talk about a W-2. And we'll touch back on that. What about tax treaties? Compensation versus wages. So compensation versus wages are, say you have a job on campus and you are a GRA. And so that's different than claiming a scholarship or fellowship. Scholarship or fellowship is more the student side, and then 1042Ss versus or 1042S and a W-8 Ben. 1042Ss are a tax form like a W-2. W-8 Bens are a tax treaty for students. And yeah, can I get the next slide, please? Okay, so Glacier. Glacier is super important. I'm the Glacier admin, so I advocate for it. You would get an email from me saying that you need to complete what we call your Glacier tax summary report. And you go in and you create a profile, and it determines all of your tax exemptions, your tax eligibilities. It determines whether you're a non-resident or a tax resident. It determines your substantial presence test, which Brian touched on. So it's very important. It's very important to keep up to date. If you have a immigration status change, say you go from an F1 to an H1B, say you have some travel history changes that you need to update. Glacier calculates, it's very important to keep your information up to date because that determines your eligibilities. It creates a W-4. It's mentioned here on the slide. A W-4 is what a W-4 tells your withholding agent, which is UT, what to take from you in taxes out of every paycheck. Now, non-residents are very limited on what they can claim on a W-4. So non-residents really don't have any option but to choose single, and you often find that you are taxed higher because you're a non-resident for tax purposes. And that W-4 actually might have a little spot under box 4, I believe, that says non-resident alien. And that actually lets your withholding agent know that we need to tax you a little bit higher. But the flip side is non-residents don't pay FICA and Medicare taxes. So where you might pay higher taxes and federal taxes, you may not have to pay the FICA and Medicare taxes. But anyway, Glacier will populate a W-4 for you, and it tells us as your withholding agent what to take from you out of every paycheck. And then your tax treaty eligibility. I've already mentioned that Glacier produces that form, and that's, how we know in payroll that you are eligible for that exemption. Can I get the next slide? Okay, I think this is back to Brian or Elizabeth. I don't know.
So we'll talk a little bit about the tax filing process. So what do? You start hearing a lot about tax at this time of the year. You see it on TV commercials, you see it on web ads, and it's all about filing your taxes. It's that time of the year. So let's talk about how to do that. Can you send me forward, Valentina? Thank you. So first, let's talk about the tax forms that you would need. And I've grouped these by the time when you might see them. So Alyssa talked a little bit about the W-4. You would normally see that when you start employment at any new employer. And one particularity at UT, you'll actually complete that form 2 times at UT. You'll complete it with your department when you begin a job. And then when Alyssa gets your paperwork and discovers that you're not a US citizen, she'll send you to Glacier and you'll complete it again in Glacier. And like Alyssa talked about, that's so we can make sure to capture you as a non-resident alien so that we take out more tax in your check. And while that sounds less than ideal to get less money. It does mean that you might end up paying less at the end of the year. So it works out well for you because while you don't get all the money that you might want, you don't have to pay as much at the end of the tax year. At the end of the tax year, so starting in about January, there's also a bunch of forms that you would get then. One is a W-2. This is a form that will record the annual income that you made and how much tax was withheld from it. So you would get a W-2 from each employer that you worked with in a year. You might get a 1042-S. As we've talked about, this is something that records your tax treaty income. So this is income that you received that was subject to a tax treaty. So you have to fill out all the forms in Glacier to be eligible to get that tax treaty counted. The 1042-S also tracks taxable scholarships. And so if you have received a scholarship that is over the cost of tuition and fees, you might have a taxable scholarship, and you would get a copy of that on your 1042-S. Not every international student will receive a 1042-S. So if you don't have one, don't panic. You might also get a 1099, and 1099s have a bunch of different endings to them. There's the 1099 INT. There's a couple other 1099s. These track other forms of income. So income that might be taxable, that's not your wages. A really common one is if you have a bank account that earns interest, you might get a 1099 for that. To document the income from interest. You might also get one if you have dividends from stock or if you have stock sales. A lot of that is tracked on 1099 forms. And also there's the 1098-T, which tracks tuition expenses that you have paid. If you're a non-resident alien, as we talked about, you may not get to count that towards your tax, but you get the form anyway because it gets created for most people. There's also forms that we have at the end of the forms for tax filing. So the 1090 or the 1040 NR is the form that records tax filing for non-resident aliens. There's a couple other 1040 forms, like the regular 1040 for US citizens is just a 1040. And there's also a form called an 8843, which should be filled out by all non-resident aliens, and it basically tracks your presence in the United States with the IRS. If you don't have income, you still have to complete an 8843 form. So that's a basic overview of the tax forms that you'll see at this time of the year and when you might see them. Can you send me forward, Valentina? Thank you. So what do you need to file? Number one, you need some kind of tax filing software. Some people still file the forms on paper, and you're welcome to do so if you would like. The tax filing software does make things a little bit easier. You also need the forms that we just talked about. You need your social security number, and you'll also need copies of your immigration documents, like your I-20, your passport, your I-94, for yourself and your dependents. A lot of that information will be recorded on your tax forms. Next slide. So here is a little bit of a flow chart. I'd recommend that maybe you pause the presentation here and take yourself through the flow chart a little bit. This is going to help you determine what you need to do. So you start right up there in the top left corner. What do I need to file? Go through. Were you in the US in 2023? If you were not in the United States in the tax year, you don't have to file anything. So if you arrived in January of 2024, you don't have to complete any paperwork because this strictly concerns the 2023 tax year. If you were here in 2023, your next step is to determine which form you need to file. If you were employed or received income, then you need to start working on which tax return documents do you need to file. So that's the yes category for that. If you weren't employed and you didn't receive income, you are just going to complete the form 8843 and move on. But if you did have income in 2023, you can follow the flow chart here. Like I said, hit pause and take yourself through the rest of the chart. But we'll move on so that so as not to get bogged down in that. But like I said, hit pause if you want to take yourself through the flow chart. Next slide. So if you did not work in the past year, this is what the form 8843 looks like. This is the top of it. Like I said, this form tracks presence in the United States for non-resident aliens within the United States. It's fairly easy to fill out. This is what the top of it looks like. You just fill it out and mail it in. There is the form, but also an instruction document that's separate from the form that kind of takes you through the different questions that it asks. Next slide. So if you have income, but you do not have access to Glacier Tax Prep, these would be folks who have not worked on campus, have not worked for UT. So if you worked for an on-campus organization that's not UT, like Aramark, our dining services team, or if you had some kind of employment through curricular practical training or optional practical training, but not on UT's campus, you won't have access to GTP. But there are some services that you can use. If you are a non-resident alien, you can purchase access to GTP for a fee. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $50, which is still a little bit cheaper than some of the options for US citizens. There's also a company called Sprintax that is similar to GTP. Also, you would pay a fee for that, but it's software that will help you work out all the documentation you need to submit. If you're a resident alien, you file like a US citizen. And can you go back, Valentina? You might be eligible for something called IRS free file. If you have less than a certain amount of income, then you can file like a US citizen and use a free service. You could also pay for a service, but that's only for resident aliens. All right, now we're ready to move forward. So the Glacier software is called GTP. And like I said, it's available to anyone who is a non-resident alien and an employee of UT. Next slide. So if you are eligible for GTP, you will get an email that looks like this. It comes from support@onlinetax.net. It has a link for getting into the software and exactly what to do. So we have some screenshots from that process here. So we'll go to the next slide. The first thing that you're going to do is sign into Glacier. So when you first are hired on campus, you'll come to this screen and you'll go to create, update, and view my individual record. When you have finished that step and it's time to file your taxes for the year, once we've opened up GTP for the year, which I think normally happens sometime in February, right, Alyssa? Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
And email, that's when that email that we just showed on the last screen goes out. So you're going to click that green link that says complete my US tax return using Glacier Tax Prep. So next slide. This is the home screen for Glacier Tax Prep. And you are just going to go straight through the steps. So you'll click on step 1 and get started. Next slide. So basically Glacier Tax Prep is just going to ask you questions and you're going to answer them. If you're not sure what they're asking, if the question is unfamiliar to you, there is a great column there on the right side, that green column that goes down the side that explains the questions. So if you're like, I don't know, you can check on that right side, and it may give you more information that will help you answer the questions. A really common one that we get is, what is your country of tax residence? That's the last question on the screen. Normally is the last country, whether you are a citizen or a permanent resident of that country where you paid taxes before you came to the US. All right, next slide. The first thing that you're going to do after you put in your name and your citizenship information is talk about your time within the United States. In this screen, Glacier is trying to determine whether or not you are a resident alien for tax purposes or a non-resident alien for tax purposes. So you're going to put in all the information about your travels in the United States. So you really only want to have one column checked and still in the United States. So you're going to have a date of arrival and a date of departure for each trip. So if you go home for Christmas, or if you go home for the summer, you'll have an entry date and an exit date. If you can't remember those dates, you could check your passport stamps. If your passport isn't stamped, you can look up your travel history by looking up your I-94, and there's an option on that screen to look up your travel history. If you're not sure how to do that, you can contact ISSS and drop in advising, and we'll be happy to help you sort through that. So next, Glacier will tell you whether you are a resident alien or a non-resident alien. If you're a resident alien, it will stop you from moving forward because this GTP is only for non-resident aliens. So if you're a non-resident alien, you're good to go. Move forward to step 2. The next thing that you're going to do in step 2 is put in your income statements. So one really common question that we get here is, I have no idea what these forms are and I don't have any of these forms. That's okay. Most people only have 1 or 2, sometimes more. All of this is listed because it's possible for someone to have all of these forms. However, usually not many people do. And so don't worry if you did not receive these. The most common is the W-2. And like we've said before, this is the form that tracks your annual income from every employer. So you'll click on Add Form there next to where it says W-2. And then we'll go to the next slide and I'll show you what that looks like. Each box on your W-2 has either a letter or a number. And so even if your W-2 looks a little bit different from this form, and the UT one does look a little bit different, the box numbers and letters will match. So you're going to look at those boxes that are kind of yellowish in color, and fill in the information from your W-2 into those boxes. If it's blank, leave it blank. If there's no way to fill in the information, you can also, don't worry about filling in that information. So you're going to fill in the employer identification number from your W-2, your wages, your tax withheld. You're going to go down to the bottom and select the kind of institution that has provided the form to you, and then you're going to move on. So next slide. Next, Glacier is just going to verify whether or not you are eligible for a tax treaty. By this point, this should not be new information to you, because when you sign up with Glacier, when you begin your job, it will already have recorded this information, but it's going to kind of verify that with you again. Next slide. Next up, you're going to put in some information about your about UT. So since we are sponsoring your immigration status, there's a couple questions about that on your tax forms. All of this information is available on your I-20. And so, except maybe the telephone number. But you're welcome to pause this here, take a screenshot. All of this information is current as of today. Just about everybody who works in the International Student and Scholar Services Office is a designated school official. So you could use Brian's name, you could use mine, you could use William's name, just copy what's here. But you'll put this information in next. And then there is a screen full of additional information, and I will tell you, this is the screen that gets the most questions. Lean into that green sidebar that's on the right side of the screen. I think in this recording, it's hidden by our faces, but when you actually log in, you'll be able to see it there. So the first question is about contributions to charities. This is a lot of times if you make contributions to US charities, that can potentially decrease your tax liability. What you want to put here is information that you can document. So if you have a canceled check, or if you have a receipt, or a letter from the charity, then you can put that information in. You don't want to lie here, and you don't want to put in information that you can't document in some way. The next question asks about estimated federal tax payments, and I think we need to go back and look at that just a little bit more closely. Estimated tax payments are payments that you make to the US government through the year, where you actually take out your checkbook or however you're going to pay it and make an extra payment to the US government. It's not asking here about taxes that you paid through payroll. It's not asking about payroll taxes. It's not asking about sales tax. It's asking about specifically money that you have paid additionally for your taxes specifically. This is not really very common for international students. A lot of people who have a complicated tax situation might have to do something like this. For example, when I was in graduate school, I worked 3 jobs. And because I had a multiple job scenario, I didn't pay enough in taxes through the year. And I owed so much money at the end of the year. And the next year, every quarter I wrote a big check to the government to kind of catch myself up so I didn't have to pay as much at the end of the year. That is an estimated federal tax payment. If you don't know that you paid this, you probably haven't paid this. It's a very intentional thing to do. So this screen of additional information is kind of wacky questions that are a little bit off the wall. So really kind of look into that panel on the right side that gives you more information as you're answering those. It will be really, really helpful. No, forward. Next screen. There we go. After you have put in all of your income, all of your additional information, it's going to tell you whether or not you have tax due or whether you have a refund. Unfortunately, in our example here, our sample student owes quite a bit of money in federal tax. So it's going to give some information about how to pay that. One thing to keep in mind is as a non-resident alien, you are not allowed to file your taxes electronically. You will have to print your documents and mail them in. So it will not accept an electronic filing from you. So it's asking you to acknowledge that at the bottom. And in our next screen, we'll talk about dependents. So if you have dependents here in the United States, you will put in their information so that it can print out the right forms to include them as well. And then next up, this is how to put in the spouse information. You'll also do this for your children, because if your children or your spouse were present in the United States in the tax year, they'll also have to fill out the form 8843. So this is information that will help to fill that out. Next up. Finally, we get to the end, and here's the screen where you really need to pay attention about your tax documents, because like I said, this software will not file them electronically. You're going to have to file them on paper. So if you click that green button in the middle that says print/view forms, it will print you a PDF packet. And I get very enthusiastic about this packet because I think it makes things really easy for you. So when you open up this packet, the first page will be full of instructions. The remaining pages will be full of completed tax forms. So here's the instruction form. As you can see, it tells you exactly what to do. It tells you what to sign, what to attach, where to mail it, when the deadline is. So this first page of the packet will really help you in determining what to do next. I think it's one of the most helpful things that GTP does because it makes it really, really easy. So you're just going to follow the instructions here on the first page, make a copy, and then mail it off as instructed. This is what the completed tax form will have on it. And so you can see that all the information that you've put in from your W-2s, from your passport, all that information is input here for you. So you don't have to actually fill out these forms. Glacier has done it for you. And all you'll have to do is just sign and follow the instructions on that front page. If you are a non-resident alien, your tax season action steps are to use Glacier Tax Prep to prepare your tax forms because that's what we provide for you as a UT employee. Print and sign them and mail them off by the deadline. And I think Brian is going to pick us up here.
Yes, you are correct. Thank you, Elizabeth, for going through the Glacier Tax Prep screens and showing us what those forms look like. Now, we mentioned earlier that there is an email that goes out from support@onlinetax.net concerning access to Glacier Tax Prep. So we want to point out that you might receive some communication that is not from Glacier Tax Prep, not from the University of Tennessee, not from the IRS or, official tax agency of the US. So if you receive a phone call or if you receive an email, an email that claims to be directly from the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, it is a scam. The IRS will not call you. The IRS will not send email. They only send official letters. So if you get those kinds of calls, do not give your credit card information. Do not share your Social Security number or immigration information. So sometimes during tax season, there are scams that occur, and we wanted you to be aware of those. If you have any questions about whether a phone call or an email is something that you need to take action on, please contact an immigration advisor at ISSS. All right, next slide. Now, this is the time in the presentation where we're going to talk about some frequently asked questions, and I'm going to ask the question, and then Elizabeth or Alyssa will respond to the question. So since we're recording this without an audience of students, we've collected some questions that students have been asking, maybe via email or other ways. So the first question is, I have used Glacier to fill out my tax forms and did not receive a refund. Other students have hired external tax services to do their taxes, and they received large refunds. Are international students required to use Glacier, or is it optional?
So I would say that Glacier Tax Prep is not required. You do not have to use it. It is one of the things that we offer for free for our employees and students. So if you have Glacier Tax Prep and you've been emailed about it and it's available to you, it is a free option, but you don't have to use it. And maybe Elizabeth can talk more about Tax and how much those services might cost and if that might be a better option for you. I'll say that it's not so easy to just compare to what your friends may get back, what you owe versus what your friends maybe they got a refund and you didn't. Everybody's tax situation is very different, and there could be so many reasons that we just can't even go over right now as to why that may be. but I'll let Elizabeth maybe talk about Sprint tax.
Yeah, I would encourage you to maybe, if you're not sure which tax service you want to use, check out the websites of Sprint Tax or Glacier. They would have good information. Of course, with our presentation, you've kind of seen what the inside of Glacier looks like. But Sprint Tax might be a little bit different. They do have a pretty good website and a pretty good blog where you could go and research that a little bit more. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, if you are not a resident, if you're not a non-resident, so if you are a resident alien for tax purposes, you won't be able to use Glacier. And so you'll have to find something different to use. You could go back to that screen and see some of the options there. There would still be software available to you. And you would just need to kind of determine what the best course of action would be for you. But I would recommend keeping in mind whether you are a resident alien or a non-resident alien in choosing software. If you are a non-resident alien for tax purposes, please do not use any kind of software that is geared towards resident aliens. Did I say that right? So if you're not a resident alien, don't use software that's geared towards US citizens or permanent residents, because it will not help you. It'll put you in a bad place. So just make sure that you're using the correct software for your status.
So is it possible that in this scenario that the other students, the person's talking about, didn't file their taxes correctly?
Yeah, it's possible. We hear every year from students who come in and say, oh no, last year I used, and they'll mention a service that they've used, one that everybody's heard of on TV. And they're actually a non-resident alien. They shouldn't have used that software. So they may have gotten a refund and they're wondering what to do next. Because they've realized that they filled out the forms incorrectly. I believe that you can file an amendment when things like that happen. Some of the tax services like Sprint Tax, I think, will help you file an amendment. They have a service for that. You have to pay for it. But you know, those are things that you could look into. It's not something that we're going to be able to help you with in the office. That really falls into very specific tax advice. And we are not qualified to do that. So you'll want to seek out someone who is qualified to deal with a non-resident alien tax situation.
Okay, next question. Why do I have a charge on my account? And I think this is talking about the MyUTK account. The financials part of the MyUTK account. So why do I have a charge on my account? The bursar's office won't explain it to me.
Okay, so that you might see an NRA tax charge on your MyUTK. So we get this question a lot in payroll. It's not a tax that we put on your account because we don't do the student side. I only deal with employees. However, the bursar's office does send me a file every semester, and on this file, it has how much your total non-service scholarship fellowship gross was, and then it takes out the so it deducts the non-taxable items like fees, books, tuition, and then anything remaining that is taxable, it multiplies that by 14%. So that's where that charge comes from. So it is assessed by the bursar's office. They may, I mean, it's assessed by us too in payroll, but it's on your student account. But I guess a lot of them, foreign national taxation is a little complicated. So if you have questions about that, we can answer that in payroll, but it is determined overall. I guess the charges are kept in by the bursar's office on your campus.
Right. So that has to do with, is that more often related to scholarships and fellowships?
Correct. Non-service scholarships, fellowships.
Okay. Next question, what is a 1098T and why did I receive it?
Elizabeth, do you want to help me answer this too? So the bursar's office also might issue you a 1098T if you're a non-resident, but for non-resident aliens, really a 1042S is, so if you do have that charge on your account, you're more than likely going to have a 1042S form. 1042S's, we've mentioned, keep track of tax treaty exemptions, but also these types of charges that you saw on your My UTK. That those taxations are also reported on a 1042S. So 1042S and a 1098T are pretty similar. You might receive a 1098T, but if you're a non-resident, the 1042S form is what you'll use and what GTP kind of asks of you.
I think the 1098T, US citizens can sometimes get a tax credit for their education costs for their tuition. And so that's why they send it out. And it's a lot easier for them to hit a button and send it to everyone. So.
All right, I'm unmuted now. So we're moving on to the next set of questions. Next question, do former students that worked on campus in 2023 receive 1042S forms, Glacier tax prep information, etc.? What if their NetID or UT email are no longer available?
So yes, I think the way Glacier kind of tracks this, but yes, if you worked on campus in 2023, if you received a 1042S form, if anything in 2023, you do receive Glacier tax prep information. There's a little fine line there when you come in late and maybe you didn't turn in Glacier forms until late. But yes, you receive Glacier tax prep information if you worked on campus in 2023. If you're terminated and say your UT email is no longer available, if you changed your email before you left, then you should still get it to your whatever email you left Glacier with. However, a lot of people don't have their UT email. You'll need to contact me basically and ask for assistance with your GTP if you think that you might be eligible for that and you're having trouble with it. So we run into that every year, but I can help you with that.
Okay, and I should mention that students that aren't sure who to contact or how to get in touch with the right person, feel free to send an email to international@utk.edu. That is our office email account. But let's move on to the next question. This one says, I did not receive any email from the university to file my taxes, and the links you sent me ask me only to log in. I cannot sign up. So somebody that's having trouble like this, what should they do, or what is an explanation for why they would be asking this question?
Is this asking about GTP specifically? They received an email from.
It says they didn't receive any email.
I did not receive any email.
My guess is that this question comes from someone who is aware that other people are getting emails.
Gotcha.
And they're wondering, okay, why am I not getting an email? Why didn't I get any information? I don't know what to do.
So in this situation, you could be a resident alien for tax purposes, so that Glacier may not, it's saying that you're not eligible for it to use GTP, so you're not getting those email notifications. And when you log in, it's not an option for you. So if you log in your Glacier account and it's grayed out, that's often why, because you're not eligible to use the service.
Have there ever been cases where somebody didn't get information, but maybe they should have? And if
There,
so,
there are
what should
always
they do?
those, yeah, there are always those instances. I have to look into every one, so it's just important to, you can email me and I can look into your case if you feel like, if you just want to know if you have that access or why. But it's, I usually have to end up looking into each particular person. It's not so much a wide, it's not an easy answer, I guess. But I can
Okay,
help
I
you with
think,
it.
yeah, I think the last two questions here are somewhat related, and I think Elizabeth would probably respond. The first one, we've touched on both of these actually already. So I forgot to file my taxes for the last 2 years. What should I do to catch up?
I mean, I think generally speaking, you can look into filing an amendment or filing late. There could be penalties for that. And I think Glacier or Sprintex would be able to help with that process.
Well, I'm not sure if Glacier Tax Prep has, do you know for sure that it has the capability in cases where taxes weren't filed in previous years?
I'm not 100% sure. I know there's something about previous year returns on the menu screen. I haven't looked into that a whole lot. I know that Sprintex has those options.
Okay, and then the last question is related. I filed using TurboTax, or we could insert the name of any company here, even though I'm a non-resident for tax purposes, because I heard I could get a bigger refund that way. Is that okay? Or do I need to file an amended return in previous year returns? And can I schedule an appointment with you to help me with all that? This is an actual
So
email that I think an actual email that I
right.
received.
Yes, and this is a question that we've heard many times in the office, and unfortunately, it's not something that we can help with, because it, like I've said before, it's really specific tax information for you, and I am so not qualified to give that to you. I can give you a lot of good general information like we've done, but I can't really help with um, things like amendments or specific questions about your tax situation or how you can reduce your tax burden. That's really beyond our knowledge here in ISSS, for outside of ISSS scope as well. Uh, like I've said, there are a couple of services that would offer to help you file an amendment return or a late return or previous year's return, if you filed using the wrong thing. But your goal in completing your tax forms should not be to get the biggest refund possible. As an international student, your goal should be to file as correctly as possible, because it could impact your future status. You want to be able to show that you're following the laws correctly in future years.
And so I think I'm going to add that this is not a matter of us being unwilling to assist. It's actually, there is actually three things involved. Number one, a lack of knowledge. Number two, it's unethical. Number three, it's illegal. So those are the reasons we can't help, because it's outside the scope. It's not because we don't care or we don't want our students to get the information that they need. So that's a segue into the next part. So if we could move on to the next section, we wanted to make you aware of resources. And so this is really the last section of this presentation. First of all, we have Confluence FAQ pages, and these are like wiki pages that are provided. So there's one for getting started with Glacier Tax Prep, one for understanding non-resident alien tax info. Let's go on to the next slide. In addition, GTP, Glacier Tax Prep, provides some information. There are live question and answer sessions with a tax professional. So let's move on. We'll share what's some of that information. You have to actually go into your Glacier account. You need to go through some different, I think you have to actually go into Glacier Tax Prep itself and click through some of the sections there before you finally get to this page where you can select live general non-resident alien tax information and the videos. And so if there's something that we haven't covered in this presentation, if there's information that you need about filing that we didn't provide, this is where I would direct you to get more detailed information, whether it's from information they've already posted or whether it's going to one of the live Q&A sessions and being able to actually ask a question of a tax professional who is qualified. So let's go to the next slide. These are the times. So obviously this is March 20th, and I'm not sure how quickly we'll get this posted on our YouTube channel, but this is March 20th. There are still sessions remaining. There's one this afternoon. There will be sessions going up until April 15th. And so in future years, we expect that the same kind of sessions will be available. So in the year 2025, if you're watching this later, those should be available. Next slide. All right. In addition to the Confluence pages that the guides that we've put together here at ISSS, in addition to the GTP info, Sprintax has a blog. And we've mentioned before that you can, if you don't file with GTP or if you need to file a prior year return or an addendum, you might be able to do that through Sprintax, and they have a fee, which is currently $52. Where can you learn more? You can also go to the IRS website. That's going to be a little tricky to navigate and find the right information, but ultimately they are the tax service or the tax agency of the U.S. government. So they would be the ones who have the official information. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot of the Sprintax blog. Let's go to the next slide. And these are some of the links for the IRS. You might want to take a quick screenshot here. This actually is showing you the link for information for non-resident aliens and also tax publication 519, which does provide the specific or the information that the IRS has published for non-resident tax filers. And there's also a website here, usa.gov, file taxes non-citizens, which I think is pretty helpful. And it's presented in a little bit more user-friendly manner than the IRS information. Next slide. Finally, this is telling you where we're going to post. This was actually what we shared at our tax session, so you've already found us. And that is the end of our presentation. I want to thank you all for joining us and going through this. Please remember international@utk.edu. That's how you can contact us by email. So this concludes our presentation. Thank you so much.